However, I did pull into the gas station earlier today, and this guy came in on like this old shovel head. I just felt like such a dork on like the new Harley. I don't know what it was, but like you just see this like classic shovel head Harley, and you're just like, oh wow, that's so cool. When you hear that old classic noise, and you're on this like refined modern industrial piece of equipment, you feel pompous almost, you know, compared to the old shovels and knuckles that ran off of literally crude oil and kerosene, you know. Alright, and hello everybody, welcome to the review of the Harley Davidson Fat Bob with the 114 Milwaukee 8 engine. Let's take a look. Has over 1800 cc's, about 1860 or so if I remember correctly. Has a 4-inch bore. Think about that, 4 inches in diameter. Simply, that just translates to this thing has bigger jugs than the cast of Baywatch. Speaking of big fat things, this enormous fat front tire, it is 150 millimeters wide. Some rear tires on other bikes are 150 or so. Got a 180 on the back while we're on the topic. Inverted front end, which for those that don't know just means the stanchions on the bottom, the fork tubes on the top, or what that translates to is simply better, or I should say lower unsprung weight, more a little bit direct, more precise handling that way, and so on and so on. Dual discs up front. This thing is supposed to be the high performance Harley, if you will, in the new Softail lineup. This one's pretty much stock, other than a few little things here. You can see the backrest and the rack, the hand guards that the previous owner put on. The mirrors have been flipped to underneath, which is kind of cool actually, if you ask me. Stock exhaust, which means it sounds terrible. It is in this cool bronze color though, which is one of the only redeeming things about it. Other than that, I gotta be honest with you, I don't think it looks good. I don't think it sounds good. I think that exhaust has got to go, especially since it's a Harley Davidson. I mean, come on. Nice short bobbed style rear fender, which is pretty cool. Obviously pretty aggressively sculpted seat here. This portion up here, this top portion, actually kind of digs into the small of my back. We'll talk into that a little bit more later. Of course, that unique headlight, all LED, really catches your attention. It is unique to this bike only. Alright, I think we should just go for a ride. Of course, proximity key fob, just like every other new Harley. There's a decent look at the dash there. As you see, we're in the industrial putter town here. So let's talk about the big elephant in the room. That elephant being 114 cubic inches of displacement. It is the Milwaukee 8, which means 8 valves on this engine, 4 valves per cylinder, 2 intake, 2 exhaust per cylinder. What does that mean? That means so long are the days of the twin cam. They did introduce the M8 engine in 2017 on the touring models, and then of course for 2018 brought it to the new redesigned Softail motorcycles. As everybody is pretty well aware of at this point, the Dyna is gone. The Dyna has went the way of the dodo bird, and now we got this. Speaking of which, this is the first motorcycle I've reviewed on my channel from the legendary bar and shield company that is Harley Davidson. Trying to get a little bit more well-rounded in my content and not just be pigeonholed into one or the other thing. I gotta say, we also have a used Fat Boy at the shop, and I'm liking this one a lot better. The Fat Boy also has the 114 that we have, and it does have pipes on it and everything else. It's just the lean angle on that thing was like 24 degrees. I mean, you sneeze and you're grinding peg. This one is up from there a little bit, 31 on the right, 32 on the left, degrees of lean angle, that is. So you actually do have to lean it over slightly to scrape. You still can scrape fairly easily, especially if you're used to some sport bikes, but those big fat tires kind of don't help that situation either. I can't help but compare this to my Harley I had a couple years ago. It was a 2004 Night Train with the 88 cubic inch carbureted twin cam motor. And I mean, I don't know, obviously the 114, it's gonna have torque, it's gonna pull like a freight train. I mean, it has almost 120 foot-pounds of torque. Then again, you might need that hauling this behemoth around. This thing is no joke when it comes to weight. About 680 pounds wet, if memory serves. Feels like it's made out of the scrap from a cargo ship. However, in defense of Harley Davidson, that does translate to a chassis that is very well composed and very stable even at high speeds. There's not a lot you can do to upset this chassis because it is so damn heavy. And to be honest with you, the suspension is pretty well sorted. This inverted front end, which I was very curious to feel, is actually pretty nice. Doesn't dive too much at all under heavy braking. You do have more than enough suspension travel to go around here that you don't feel like you're bottoming out constantly, like some of you might know from the older Softail chassis. I gotta say, when I ride this bike, it's a departure from the old bar and shield bikes that I can remember growing up. And I mean, obviously as a company, Harley has to modernize and update and change a little bit. And I mean, it's still a V-twin. It still has some nice thumpy power and some decent vibes when you get up into the mid-range a little bit, which we'll talk more about later, because this is a bike, or I should say an engine really. The M8 favors a really stout, meaty mid-range, and not so much that kind of, you know, 5 RPM lug-dug old school Harley kind of character that a lot of people have come to love over the years. Even my 88 cubic inch carbureted twin cam in the Night Train, I mean, you could take it down to 0.5 RPM and just put it in 6th gear and rail the snot out of it, and it just had no complaints about pulling itself right out. Whereas this, I'd say you know, obviously we're in 6th gear right now, going about 65, 66 miles an hour, rolling about 2,500 on the tack. I'd say the M8's pretty happy around 25 to 35. Again, now approaching up to 70 miles an hour or so. This thing is dead nuts smooth. You don't feel like you're being pushed around at all. I've got a good braking demo there. I gotta say, there's just a few things about this bike that, in my opinion, makes it a better motorcycle than its predecessors, yet at the same time less of a true Harley. And let me expound on what I mean a little bit. The transmission is positive and, you know, engages smoothly and is nice and everything, but it doesn't have that same sort of mechanical clunk as some of the older bikes did, which I actually really enjoyed, believe it or not, because when you're on this type of bike, cruiser, you kind of want that kind of ham-handed, kind of clunky, bulky kind of feel. It feels real industrial, and this is just a little bit more refined, and it almost, the fact that it's better makes it almost worse, if that makes sense, in my opinion. But there's a lot of people out there that would much prefer a little bit smoother engagement on the transmission and a little bit quicker shifting and all that kind of stuff. The clutch on this bike feels pretty fine to me. Let's talk about the character of the M8 itself real quick. This is a counterbalance motor, and in this particular bike it is rigid mounted into the frame. What all that means is that you're not gonna get the piss shaked out of you like you would on some other Harleys, especially like the touring bikes and the Dynas, where you feel like the mirrors are gonna fall off because it's shaking so bad. And especially here, sitting at this red light, you know, the bars aren't jumping up and down, the bike isn't trying to leap out of its own skin. Again, all of that translates to a better bike, in my opinion, but a worse Harley. You taking some of that old character out of it. This bike is almost too good for its own good. I mean, it may seem like I'm knocking on the big HD right here a little bit, but let's talk about some pure positives with this bike. I think ergonomically the riding position for a cruiser is pretty much spot on perfect for me. You really have a knuckles forward kind of cruiser stance there. You got obviously the feet forward thing going on, which I am honestly never a big fan of, in the exception of one or two bikes, and this is probably one of them, to be honest with you. This riding position really does suit this bike, and it's just enough to remind you, in spite of the dual discs up front and the inverted front end, you're nowhere near on a sport bike, which is not a bad thing. I must say the handling is not terrible. I'm gonna hop on the brakes up here just to see what those dual discs up front can do. And 55, I'll tell you what, not too bad at all. I gotta say that from a styling point of view, from a design point of view, I think they really did a great job on the look of this bike. It looks super rugged. It looks like you are constantly riding over the skulls of your dead enemies when you're on this thing. I mean, it's just super brutal looking. The tread pattern on that tire suits the bike very well. That nice wide front end with a nice big wide LED headlight really gives it that brawny character of this machine. Even the handlebar, which is a reasonable thickness towards the end, tapers into this enormously thick piece of wrought iron, just to remind you that you're not on a dainty scooter. And in the event you need to do so, you can remove the handlebars and club a seal. Let's talk more about that aggressively sculpted seat that I mentioned a little earlier. Like I said, that top portion of the seat kind of, for me, kind of digs into that the back area there, and it's kind of rubbing me a little raw, to be honest. Outside of that, though, the seat is not horribly uncomfortable. The passenger seat, I must say, however, is a bit anemic. Your passenger won't necessarily thank you for any type of long ride on this. We do have the 6-speed transmission on the Fat Bob, and 6th gear is almost too high. It has, you know, has really long legs on it, which actually, to be honest with you, is pretty perfect. 5th gear is a nice, you know, decent cruising gear, and then you click it into 6th and really got that nice long overdrive to really get those big pistons pumping, and you just thump along. Like I said, you know, you turn about 65-70 miles an hour, you're about 2,500 RPM, and it can just do it all day long and not care. Speaking of riding all day long, very small tank. It's like 3.5 gallons, 3.4 gallons. To be honest with you, that's kind of disappointing. I mean, it's not like you needed to save weight or anything when you already have more combined mass on this than an Abrams tank. Well, I gotta say, you know, I maybe during this review I haven't said the most positive things ever, and I'm kind of making jokes about it, but it's kind of hard to hate this bike. Ooh, look at that. It does not like to do that, son. Third gear, 20 miles an hour coming up a hill. It is bucking and screaming. So yeah, let's make some comments on that new Softail chassis. I gotta say, it's pretty good. It's got more than enough suspension travel for decent ride quality, yet still is rigid enough and, you know, precise enough that you can lean it over and actually make a turn with this and don't feel like you're hanging off the bow of a battleship. I'm gonna be honest, you know, after riding that 2018 Fat Boy, I was kind of disappointed. This, on the other hand, it's kind of hard to hate. It's really hard to hate. I mean, it's just, I much prefer this to the Fat Boy. Let's get that out of the way. It just handles so much better. It makes so much more sense for the type of bike that it is. And I get the Fat Boy's just like boulevard cruiser that you're literally just going up and down the Vegas Strip on and just showing off and, like, you know, looking cool and low and low and slow and all that kind of stuff. I get all that, but that just makes for a really boring riding experience, if you ask me, unless you're looking to just put on a fashion show. This bike, on the other hand, it has a little bit more athleticism. It has a little bit more let's get to it type of attitude, and I really like that. It's still big and bulky and brawny and tough looking, but I mean, you can lay it over in a corner and it's not you know, not going to carve a scar out of the road with dragging foot peg the whole time as much as you'd think. I was actually quite pleasantly surprised leaning it over initially how far it did lean until it started to scrape. Do I like this bike better than my 04 Night Train that I've been referencing? Oh man, wow. I'll put it to you this way, that 04 Night Train was probably my favorite Harley I've ever ridden prior to riding this one. So the fact that it's even a close call says a lot about this bike to me. I mean, it maybe in summary what I could say about this bike, I mean, it's not fast. It doesn't have the sharpest handling in the world. It's not light. It's not the perfect commuter bike. It's not an adventure bike. It's not something I want to go across the country on. It's not a bike that I would want as my only motorcycle by any means. But with all that stacked against it, with all those things being said, I still really like the bike. There's just that little bit of, that little place of charm that it really fits itself quite well. But at the end of the day, like I said, this thing is just hard to hate, even from a perspective that I have that, you know, I love everything on two wheels, don't get me wrong, but I've always felt that Harley Davidson's just, you compromise so much in terms of a great motorcycle just to have a Harley Davidson. This bike, you get a little bit of both. So just up to you what you want out of your riding experience. I haven't been popping any wheelies on it. I haven't been, you know, dragging knee at 120 or anything ridiculous like that on this bike yet. It is still a fun bike to ride. You know, it's kind of hard to put it down. There's just, and I'm gonna be honest, I mean, you just feel cool. I mean, you look at yourself on a rugged bike like this and it looks like, you know, something Master Chief is riding or something like that, and you just feel cool. I mean, you want to tear from some old you know, deserted town out west, like some bandits or something, and rob a bank with this thing. And I think that's what Harley was going for. At the same time, however, I did pull into the gas station earlier today and this guy came in on like this old shovel head. I just felt like such a dork on like the new Harley. I don't know what it was, but like you just see this like classic shovel head Harley and you're just like, oh wow, that's so cool. And you hear that old classic noise and you're on this like refined modern industrial piece of equipment, and you have, you know, a gear indicator and a tachometer that works and a digital dash, and you feel like you feel pompous almost, you know, compared to the old shovels and knuckles that ran off of literally crude oil and kerosene. You know,